I thought my marriage was perfect. Then her affair partner showed up at my door. They say ignorance is bliss, but I learned that it's actually just a ticking time bomb waiting to blow your life apart. Hey everyone, before we get into the video, don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button if you want more stories just like this. Thanks for the support. My name is James, and I am 34 years old. If you were to look at my life from the outside, you would have seen something that resembled a carefully curated museum exhibit. Everything was in its place. Everything was polished. Everything was quiet. I lived in a suburban neighborhood where the lawns were manicured with the precision of a surgeon and the secrets were buried deep beneath the foundations. I had a job that paid well, a car that started every morning, and a wife who seemed to be the epitome of the modern partner. We never fought. Not really. We had disagreements, of course, about paint colors or vacation destinations, but we never had the screaming matches that seemed to plague so many of my friends' relationships. There was no Cold War silence at the dinner table, no sleeping on the couch. We were a team. Or so I told myself every single morning as I looked in the mirror while brushing my teeth. I met Sophia in college. She was vibrant, chaotic in a beautiful way, the kind of person who lit up a room just by walking into it. Over the years, that chaos had settled into a serene calm. She became the manager of our lives, the one who remembered birthdays, who paid the bills on time, who ensured that the pantry was always stocked with my favorite snacks. I trusted her with my life. I trusted her with my heart. But more than anything, I trusted the narrative we had built together. The narrative said that we were different. The narrative said that we were safe. We were the couple that would grow old together on a porch somewhere, holding hands while the world burned down around us. It was a comforting thought. It was the thought that lulled me to sleep every night. And it was the thought that made the shattering of that reality so absolutely devastating when it finally happened. I should have known that perfection is a mask. I should have realized that the absence of conflict doesn't always mean the presence of connection. In our quest to have the perfect life, we had stopped actually living it. We were going through the motions, performing the roles of husband and wife with such precision that we had forgotten to be partners. I was so busy providing for us, building the financial security I thought she needed, that I stopped looking at her. Really looking at her. I stopped noticing the small shifts in her mood, the way she would sometimes stare out the window with a look of profound sadness in her eyes, or the way she would flinch slightly when her phone buzzed late at night. I explained it all away. I told myself she was tired. I told myself she was stressed. I told myself that the silence between us was companionable, not empty. I was a master of self-deception. I built a glass house around us, admiring the clarity and the view, refusing to see the cracks that were spiderwebbing across the surface, threatening to shatter the entire structure under the slightest pressure. The day the world shifted started like any other. It was a Tuesday. It was raining, a gray, relentless drizzle that turned the world outside my window into a watercolor painting of blurred grays and greens. I was working from home, sitting in my home office, surrounded by monitors and the soft hum of my computer. Sophia had left early that morning, mentioning something about a meeting with a new client or a yoga class. I couldn't remember which. That was the thing about our life at that point. The details had become a blur. She kissed me on the cheek before she left, her lips cold, her perfume lingering in the air for a moment before dissipating. I watched her car back out of the driveway, the red taillights cutting through the gloom, and then I turned back to my screen, losing myself in the safety of numbers and spreadsheets. I had no idea that as I sat there, comfortable and dry, the storm was already brewing. I had no idea that the perfect life I thought I was protecting was already gone, dissolved by a tide of lies I was too blind to see. The knock on the door that came a few hours later wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was hesitant. A tentative tap that seemed out of place in the quiet rhythm of the house. It was the sound that marked the end of my ignorance and the beginning of the longest, hardest reality check of my life. I ignored the first knock, assuming it was a package delivery or perhaps a neighbor looking to borrow a tool. But when the sound came again, slightly more persistent, I frowned and pushed away from my desk. The house felt strangely large as I walked through the hallway. the silence amplifying the sound of my own footsteps on the hardwood floor. I wasn't expecting anyone. Sophia wasn't due back for hours, and my friends knew better than to drop by unannounced during the workday. I felt a flicker of irritation, a minor disruption to my carefully scheduled day. But as I reached for the handle of the front door, that irritation shifted into a cold sense of unease. Something felt off. The air seemed heavier, charged with a static that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I took a breath, steadying myself, and pulled the door open. Standing on my porch was a man I had never seen before. He was younger than me, perhaps in his late 20s, with a slim build and a face that was pale, drained of all color. He was soaked, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his clothes dripping water onto the welcome mat. But it was his eyes that froze me in place. They were wide, rimmed with red, and filled with a look of absolute terror. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, or perhaps a man who was realizing that he had become the ghost in someone else's life. He was shivering violently, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain continued to fall behind him, a gray curtain isolating us in this strange, suspended moment of time. I asked him what he wanted, my voice sounding harsher than I intended, a defense mechanism kicking in against the unexpected intrusion. He didn't answer immediately. He just stared at me, his gaze darting over my face as if he were committing it to memory or comparing it to an image he held in his mind. Then he swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat, and he took a half step back, as if he were considering running away. But he stayed. He looked down at his feet, then back up at me, and the sheer depth of the anguish in his expression made my stomach churn. I didn't know this man, but I could feel his suffering radiating off him like heat. He introduced himself, though his name was just a sound in the air, meaningless to me in that instant. Then, he said the words that would tear my world apart. He asked if I was Sophia's husband. The question was simple, direct, and laced with a terrible finality. I nodded, confused, wondering why a stranger would be asking about my wife in the middle of a rainy Tuesday. The reaction I got was not what I expected. He didn't try to sell me anything. He didn't ask for money. He didn't smile. Instead, he flinched as if I had struck him. He let out a breath that sounded like a sob, his shoulders slumping forward in defeat. He began to apologize, his words tumbling over each other in a rush of panic and regret. He said he didn't know. He said he had no idea. He kept repeating those phrases, a mantra of desperation, while I stood there, my grip tightening on the doorknob, my mind struggling to process what was happening. I felt a disconnect, a delay between my ears hearing his words and my brain understanding their implications. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. I saw the impact coming, but I was powerless to stop it. He reached into his jacket pocket, and for a split second, I felt a spike of fear, wondering if he had a weapon, wondering if this was a home invasion gone wrong. But what he pulled out was not a gun or a knife. It was a thick manila envelope, water-stained and crumpled. He held out to me, his hand trembling so badly the envelope shook in the air between us. He told me I needed to see this. He told me he was so sorry, that he would never have involved himself if he had known the truth. I took the envelope, the damp paper cold against my fingers. I looked at him, demanding to know what this was about, demanding to know why he was standing on my porch destroying my afternoon. He just looked at me with those haunted eyes and whispered that she had told him she was single. She had told him she was leaving a loveless marriage. She had told him she was available. And then, as the reality of his word began to seep into my consciousness, he turned and walked away into the rain, leaving me holding the evidence of my wife's betrayal. I watched him walk down the driveway and disappear into the misty street, his silhouette fading like a bad memory. I stood there for a long time, the heavy envelope burning a hole in my hand. The rain seemed to get louder, drumming against the roof of the porch, echoing the chaotic pounding of my own heart. A part of me wanted to run after him, to demand more answers, to punch the confusion out of him. But a larger, colder part of me knew that the answers weren't with him anymore. They were right here in my hand. I slowly closed the door, shutting out the world, shutting out the rain, and locking myself in with the silence of my home. The house that had felt so safe an hour ago now felt like a tomb. The air was stale, suffocating. I walked back to the living room, my movements mechanical, detached from my thoughts. I sat down on the edge of the sofa, the leather cool against my legs, and placed the envelope on the coffee table. For a moment, I just stared at it. It was innocent enough, just paper and glue. But I knew that once I opened it, there was no going back. The innocence of my life, the comfortable narrative of my perfect marriage, was over. I opened the flap. Inside was a stack of photographs and printed out text message conversations. My hands shook as I pulled them out. I didn't want to look. I wanted to throw them into the fireplace, watch them burn, and pretend a stranger had never knocked on my door. But the human need for the truth, even when it hurts, is a powerful thing. I had to know. I had to see the monster that had been living in my house. I picked up the first photo. It was grainy, taken in a dimly lit restaurant. I recognized the back of Sophia's head immediately. The way she held her wine glass, the specific curve of her neck, the laugh that I could see even without hearing it. But it was the man across from her that made my breath catch in my throat. It was him, the stranger, the kid from a porch. They were holding hands across the table. Their faces were turned toward each other, expressions of intimate conspiracy, a world of two that existed entirely outside of me. I flipped to the next photo. They were kissing, not a polite peck, but a deep, passionate kiss that belonged in the early stages of a relationship, not a marriage of 10 years. I felt sick. I felt a physical wave of nausea roll over me, the acid of jealousy burning in my throat. I put the photos down and picked up the papers. The text messages were worse. I read line after line of conversation that spanned months. I saw my wife through the eyes of another man. I saw the side of her I thought was reserved only for me. She called him pet names. She complained about me. She vented about the tedium of her life, about how trapped she felt. I saw her tell him that she loved him. I saw her make plans to meet him in hotels, in cities hours away, under the guise of business trips or shopping sprees with friends. Every business trip I had supported, every late night she had claimed was Jabon, was laid out in black and white text. The dates aligned perfectly with my memories. There was the weekend she went to a spa in the mountains. There was the week she was at a conference in Chicago. All lies, all fabricated to give her time with him. The betrayal was comprehensive. It wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a lifestyle. It was a second life she had constructed with the care and attention she used to put into our marriage. And then I found the final few messages. The ones that explained why the stranger was on my porch. They were recent, just a few days old. In them, he was pressing her. He was asking when she was going to tell me. He wanted her to leave. He was tired of being the secret. And her responses were chilling in their evasiveness. She told him he was rushing things. She told him the timing wasn't right. She told him she needed to be sure. She strung him along, just as she had strung me along. I realized then that the kid on the porch wasn't the villain of this story. He was just another victim. He was a guy who had fallen for a woman who didn't exist. He fell for the version of Sophia she presented to him, trapped, unhappy, ready to flee. And when he realized she might not be who she said she was, when he saw the wedding ring she probably hid or the photos she cropped, he came to me. He did the one thing I hadn't been able to do. He sought the truth. I sat there for hours, surrounded by the debris of my marriage, reading the words over and over again until my eyes burned. The silence of the house was no longer peaceful. It was accusatory. It screamed at me, asking how I could have been so blind, so stupid, so trusting. I didn't move from the sofa until I heard the garage door open. The mechanical rumble signaled that Sophia was home. Panic, sharp and electric, shot through me. I had to hide the evidence. I didn't want to confront her yet. I wasn't ready. I shoved the photos and papers back into the envelope and tucked it under the cushion beside me, smoothing the leather to hide any trace of what I had just read. I stood up, my legs feeling weak, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I walked to the kitchen entryway, just as the door from the garage opened. She walked in, carrying a bag of groceries, looking exactly the same as she had that morning. Her hair was slightly damp from the rain, her makeup was fresh, and she offered me a bright, easy smile when she saw me. It was the smile I had loved for a decade. It was the smile that now made my skin crawl. She asked me how my day was, her voice light and breezy, completely oblivious to the nuclear bomb that had just gone off in our living room. She moved around the kitchen, putting away groceries, humming a tune under her breath. I watched her, transfixed by the performance. It was Oscar level. If I hadn't held the proof in my hand just moments before, I never would have guessed she was capable of such deception. I answered her monosyllabically, grunts and nods that she seemed to interpret as my usual work focus. She chattered away about a sale she found at the mall and a new recipe she wanted to try for dinner. Every word she spoke felt like a lie. Every gesture of affection, the brush of her hand against my arm as she passed me, felt contaminated. I felt like I was living with a stranger. A beautiful, charming, sociopathic stranger. I excused myself to the bathroom, claiming a headache, and locked the door behind me. I leaned against the sink, gripping the porcelain, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me looked older, harder. The innocence was gone from his eyes. I needed to talk to someone. But who? My friends? My parents? I couldn't bear the humiliation of admitting that my perfect marriage was a sham, that I was the clueless husband everyone pitted behind my back. Then, I remembered the card the stranger had left with the envelope. I had tossed it aside in my initial shock, but I dug it out of my pocket now. It had a name, Lucas, and a phone number. It felt wrong to call him. He was the other man. He was the one who had slept with my wife. But as I looked at his words on the card, the scrawled apology, I remembered the look on his face. He hadn't looked like a home wrecker. He had looked like a casualty. I hesitated for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen of my phone. It went against every instinct of male pride and self-preservation. But the loneliness of the betrayal was crushing. I needed to know I wasn't crazy. I needed to compare notes. Y sin na text. Simple. Direct. I asked if we could meet. He replied almost instantly. He suggested a neutral place, a coffee shop on the other side of town, a place where nobody knew either of us. We agreed to meet the next morning. Lying in bed next to Sophia that night was the closest thing to hell I had ever experienced. She slept soundly, breathing softly, her hand resting near mine. I stared at the ceiling for hours, imagining the text messages she had sent, imagining her with him, wondering how she could lie so effortlessly. I felt like I was sleeping next to a snake. When the sun finally came up, I slipped out of the house before she woke up, claiming an early meeting. I drove to the coffee shop with a knot of tension in my stomach. I didn't know what to expect. Anger? Violence? Tears? But when I saw Lucas sitting in the corner booth, looking even worse than he had the day before, I felt a strange sense of camaraderie. We were the two idiots on the chessboard, realizing that while we were moving pawns, the queen had been playing a completely different game. Lucas stood up when I approached, looking nervous. He looked even younger in the daylight, wearing a hoodie that looked like it had seen better days and jeans that were frayed at the hems. He wasn't the slick, alpha male type I had secretly feared Sophia might leave me for. He was just a kid. We didn't shake hands. There was an awkward pause where we both sized each other up, trying to find the resemblance to the descriptions the other must have given in text messages. Finally, I sat down across from him. He offered to buy me a coffee, a gesture that was so absurdly polite given the circumstances that I almost laughed. I declined. I just wanted to talk. We sat there for 3 hours. And in those 3 hours, we dismantled the life I thought I knew. Lucas told me everything. He had met Sophia 6 months ago at a bookstore. She claimed to be a freelance graphic designer, which was technically true, though she had mostly given up work since we got married. She told him she was in the process of a divorce, that her husband was controlling and emotionally distant, that they were just living together as roommates for financial reasons until the paperwork went through. She played the victim card perfectly, twisting the narrative of our marriage to suit her needs. She told Lucas things about me, personal, intimate things that made my blood boil. She took the private struggles we had faced over the years, like my brief period of depression after a job loss, and weaponized them to turn him against me. She painted me as a monster so that he would feel like her savior. Listening to him, I realized that Sophia hadn't just cheated on me physically. She had assassinated my character to justify her own actions. But as Lucas spoke, I saw the cracks in his story too. He admitted that he had pressed her for details about the divorce. She always had an excuse. The lawyer was slow. The husband was stalling. The assets were complicated. He said he felt guilty about being the other man, but she had reassured him that the marriage was over in every way but the legal one. He loved her. He said it with such heartbreaking sincerity. He talked about future plans, about moving in together, about adopting a dog. The look on his face when he admitted to these dreams was devastating. He realized, just as I did, that he had been living in a fantasy. Sophia wasn't leaving me. She was juggling us. She was compartmentalizing her life so effectively that she was essentially two different people. We started comparing timelines. I pulled out the envelope. He showed me his phone. We mapped out the last 6 months on a napkin. We realized that she had spent certain holidays with me, acting like the loving wife, and other weekends with him, playing the doting girlfriend. We found overlaps, times when she claimed to be with me, but was with him, and vice versa. The sheer logistical effort required to maintain this level of deceit was mind-boggling. She wasn't just sleeping with him. She was constructing an entire alternate universe. We discovered credit card charges for hotels and dinners that I had never seen, bills she must have intercepted in the mail or paid online with hidden accounts. The financial betrayal added a new layer of anger. While I was working myself to the bone to provide for our perfect life, she was spending our money on her affair. The most shocking revelation came when we discussed her trips. Lucas mentioned that Sophia had often disappeared for days at a time, even when she wasn't with him. She told him she had to go back to the Hell House to keep up appearances or deal with family emergencies. But looking at the calendar, we realized there were gaps where she was neither with me nor with him. We looked at each other, a cold realization dawning. Was there a third? Or was she just alone, needing space from the exhaustion of lying to two men? It was a question that hung in the air, unanswered and terrifying. By the time we left the coffee shop, the dynamic had shifted. Lucas wasn't my enemy. He was a witness. We were bound together by the same web of lies, and we both knew that the only way to catch the spider was to set a trap. We spent the next 2 days planning. It felt surreal, operating like a covert unit in my own marriage. Lucas was hesitant, his heart still broken, his moral compass spinning wildly at the thought of ambushing a woman he claimed to love. But I was fueled by a cold, righteous rage. I needed to see her face when the walls closed in. I needed to see her squirm. We decided on Friday evening. I told Sophia I was taking her out for a surprise anniversary dinner. 6 months early, I told her just because. She was thrilled, her eyes lighting up with that practiced charm. She spent the afternoon getting ready, disappearing into the master bathroom for hours. When she finally emerged, she looked stunning. She wore a dress I had never seen before, red and bold, her hair styled in a way that I recognized from the photos in the envelope. She looked like she was going to meet Lucas, not me. The irony wasn't lost on me. She kissed me, told me I looked handsome, and pretended to be the happy wife. I drove us to the restaurant, a quiet, upscale Italian place we used to frequent. We were seated at a corner table. I watched her sip her wine, scanning the room, a nervous tick I hadn't noticed before. She was checking to see if Lucas was there, or perhaps checking to see if anyone she knew was watching her. The waiter came, and we ordered. The conversation was stilted. She dominated the talking, filling the silence with gossip and stories about her day. I just nodded, staring at her, deconstructing her face, trying to find the real person underneath the makeup. Then, I nodded to the host across the room. The signal. The front door opened, and Lucas walked in. He looked pale, but determined. He made a beeline for our table. I saw Sophia spot him. Her reaction was instantaneous. Her eyes went wide. The glass of wine froze halfway to her lips, and the color drained from her face. She looked from him to me, the panic rising in her throat like bile. Lucas didn't say a word. He just walked up to the table and stood there. Sophia tried to recover, her brain scrambling for an excuse. She stammered, asking him what he was doing here, pretending to be shocked to see him in a public place. She introduced him to me as a friend from her gym, her voice trembling. I stood up. I signaled to the waiter to cancel the main courses, but to keep the wine coming. We were going to need it. I looked at Lucas, then at Sophia, and I dropped the charade. I told her that Lucas and I had already met. I told her that we had spent the week talking. The silence that fell over the table was absolute. The ambient noise of the restaurant, clinking silverware, soft jazz, murmured conversations, seemed to fade away until all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. Sophia's mask slipped. It didn't fall off all at once. It cracked piece by piece. First came denial. She accused us of stalking her, of conspiring against her, of being insane. Her voice rose, drawing the attention of nearby tables. When denial failed, she pivoted to anger. She lashed out at Lucas, calling him a liar and a stalker. She turned on me, accusing me of being controlling and jealous, of driving her into the arms of another man because I was cold and distant. She tried to use the same script she had used on Lucas, but she didn't realize that I had read the script. I had seen the text messages. I pulled the envelope out of my jacket pocket and tossed it onto the table. I told her to stop. I told her the show was over. She opened the envelope, her hands shaking, and saw the photo she had sent to Lucas, the same photo she had sent him mixed with the ones he had given me. It was the physical manifestation of her duplicity. She slumped back in her chair, defeated. The performance was over. She looked from Lucas to me, and for the first time in 10 years, I saw the real Sophia. She was tired. She was selfish. And she was cornered. She didn't apologize. That was the most striking thing. Even when presented with undeniable proof, even when caught in the act by the two men she had played, she couldn't bring herself to say she was sorry. She just looked resigned, as if this were an inevitable tragedy she had no control over. It was in that moment that I realized that the woman I loved didn't exist. She had died a long time ago, replaced by this hollow shell of a person who was capable of destroying lives just to feel something. I paid the bill for the wine we didn't drink. I turned and walked out, leaving her sitting there with the ghosts of her lies. Leaving the restaurant felt like shedding a skin I had been wearing for a decade. I walked out into the cool night air, my lungs expanding for the first time in months. Lucas followed me. We stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at each other. The alliance that had formed in the fire of betrayal was now dissipating. We were no longer co-conspirators. We were just two men trying to figure out how to live in a world that had been tilted on its axis. He offered to drive me home, but I declined. I needed a walk. I needed the physical sensation of moving forward, away from the wreckage. We shook hands this time. It was a grim, silent acknowledgement of the hell we had just survived. He promised to stay away, and I believed him. He was just as much a victim as I was, perhaps more so. He had lost a relationship he thought was his future. I had lost a past that I thought was real. I walked for miles. The city blurred around me, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows. I didn't go home immediately. I couldn't face that empty house yet. I thought about Sophia, about the conversation we would inevitably have about the lawyers and the asset division, the messy, ugly business of untangling two lives that had been woven together so tightly. I knew there was no fixing this. There was no going back to the way things were. The trust was not just broken, it was atomized. You can't rebuild a foundation made of dust. I thought about the concept of a perfect marriage. I realize now that perfection is a lie we tell ourselves to avoid the hard work of being vulnerable. A real marriage is messy. It involves fights and uncomfortable truths and the risk of getting hurt. We had skipped the hard parts and went straight for the performance, and that was why it was so easy for her to cheat. We were already play acting. She just changed the script. Eventually, I ended up in a hotel room. I booked it for the week. I sent Sophia a text telling her not to wait up, telling her that the locks would be changed by the time she got home. It was cruel, perhaps, but I felt a distant sense of satisfaction knowing that for once, I was the one pulling the strings. The divorce was swift and brutal. She contested nothing, perhaps because she knew the evidence I held was damning enough to ruin her in court, or perhaps because she was just tired of the game. She moved out within a month. I sold the house. I couldn't walk past that front door without remembering the knock that changed everything. I moved into a smaller apartment, a place with thin walls and noisy neighbors, a place that was chaotic and imperfect, but undeniably real. It took a long time to heal. There were days when the anger would flare up, hot and bright, blinding me. There were nights when the loneliness felt like a physical weight crushing my chest. I missed the companionship. I missed the comfort of having someone in my life who knew my history. But I learned to be alone. I learned to sit with my own thoughts without the need for distraction. I ran into Lucas once about a year later. He was working a coffee shop, looking healthier, happier. We nodded at each other, a silent nod of respect between survivors. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. We had compared our notes, we had closed the book, and we had moved on to different chapters. My life today is not the fairy tale I thought I was living. It's quieter. It's messy, but it's mine. I don't look for perfection anymore. I look for honesty. I look for cracks. Because I learned that it's in the cracks that the light gets in. The stranger at my door didn't just bring me proof of an affair. He brought me the truth about myself. He showed me that I had been sleeping through my own life, accepting the illusion instead of demanding the reality. And while waking up was painful, even excruciating, I would rather be awake in a storm than asleep in a glass house. The knock on the door was the end of my marriage, but it was the beginning of the rest of my life. And for that, however strange it sounds, I think I owe him a thank you.